So you want to be consistent. You know exactly what you need to do. You've set the intention, you've made the plan, you've started 100 times, and every time the same thing happens. You start strong, you're committed, you're doing it, but then a few days in, a few weeks in, you stop and you can't quite explain why. You tell yourself maybe it's discipline, that you don't have enough willpower, that you need to get more motivated. So you try again, you push harder, you tell yourself you'll want it more this time. And for a few days, it works until it doesn't. And then you're back to the same conclusion. Something's wrong with you. You're not committed enough, disciplined enough, strong enough to follow through. But here's the thing, it's not any of those. You're not falling off because you're lacking discipline, willpower, or motivation. You're falling off because something in you is resisting the change. And it's not conscious. When you try to build a new habit, you're not just changing what you do, you're changing who you are. And your brain has spent years building a very specific understanding of who you are, what you're capable of, what's normal for you, what sticks and what doesn't. And that understanding isn't just your thoughts, it's wired into your nervous system. It's the baseline your system uses to predict what's familiar. So when you try to be consistent, when you start working out, saving money, showing up differently, you're not just adding a new behavior, you're acting out of alignment of the version of you your brain believes is real, the version that is familiar and predictable. And your brain doesn't tolerate that for long because humans are wired to stay consistent with who they believe they are. And then the deeper level of consistency, it's that it's not just that change feels unfamiliar. It's that while you're doing all the external work, the meal prepping, the going to the gym, transferring money into savings, there's another conversation happening inside, a story you're telling yourself about who you are. And that story, it hasn't changed. Let's take losing weight, for example. You might be eating healthy all week, but internally you're still saying, yeah, but this never lasts for me. I always gain it back. I'm just trying to do this again. And that word trying really matters because trying means this isn't really you yet. It's something you're doing, but it's not someone you are. So when life gets hard, when you're tired, when motivation dips, your brain doesn't just register that as a rough week. It registers it as, see, I knew this wasn't who we are. And then just like that, you're back. It sees it as confirmation, proof that the old story was right. And this is why two people can do the exact same thing, follow the same plan, take the same action, and one succeeds while the other one falls off. It's not about discipline, it's whether the behavior aligns with the story they're telling themselves. The person who succeeds, their internal narrative sounds like, if I decide to do something, I do it. I'm someone who follows through. This is just who I am now. This is just what I do. There's no friction, there's no internal debate. The behavior and the identity are aligned. But the person who struggles, they're still at war with themselves. Every action is accompanied by doubt. Every step forward is followed by, but will this last? The person who struggles isn't weaker, they're just fighting a story that hasn't been updated yet. So then the real question becomes, how do you actually change the story? Because you can't just think your way into a new identity. You can't just decide, well, I'm disciplined now and expect your brain to believe it. The story changes through proof, through evidence. But here's the key, you have to build that evidence in a way that doesn't trigger resistance. And that means starting so small that your brain doesn't even register it as a threat. And it's not because you're incapable of doing more, it's because you're letting your nervous system adjust to this new version of you before you ask it to go all in. Think of it like this. If you've spent years being someone who struggles with consistency, and then you suddenly try to become someone who works out every single day, that's a massive identity leap. Your brain doesn't trust it yet. It feels fake. It feels like you're trying to be someone you're not. So instead, you start with something so small that it barely counts because your brain isn't asking, is this a good habit? It's asking, is this really who we are? By default, it assumes you're trying, but not actually becoming that version of yourself. So the moment you break your consistency streak, your brain just goes, let's go back to the old story about ourselves that we know to be true. And then so it pulls you back. But if you put your focus on being consistent on small actions, they don't trigger that disbelief. They're easy enough to repeat consistently, and repetition is the only thing your brain trusts. Not intensity, not motivation, repetition. If the action is small enough that you don't stop, that you don't fall off, something so easy that you can consistently stick to, your brain runs out of evidence for the old identity. It can't say this never lasts because it is lasting. That's the key difference. Big changes feel like something you're doing, small repeated changes start to feel like something you are. Once that behavior feels like this is just what I do, it stops requiring effort to maintain. And that's when consistency actually sticks because your brain stopped expecting you to quit. The behavior itself doesn't even matter at first. What matters is the repetition, the proof. And here's how you know it's working because it's not exciting, it's not motivating, it's just normal. Real consistency doesn't require hype or self talk or daily convincing. It doesn't feel like effort, it just feels like what you do now. And you already do this with dozens of things, by the way. You don't need discipline to eat breakfast in the morning. You don't need discipline to put your shoes on before you leave the house. You don't need motivation to lock your door at night. You don't need willpower to put on deodorant. These things aren't consistent because you're trying hard. They're consistent because they're just what you do. They're so wired in that not doing them would feel weird. And that's the difference. The things you're struggling with, you're still treating them like decisions, like something you have to talk yourself into. The things that actually stick, they stopped being decisions a long time ago. They became non negotiable. When behavior and identity are aligned, your brain stops intervening. There's no internal argument, there's no pushback, there's no will this last running in the background. You show up because that is what makes sense now. It becomes that's just a part of my routine or that's just what I do. So if you keep starting and stopping, just start small enough that you don't stop and repeat it long enough until it doesn't take effort. And that is when your brain updates the story. And then you upgrade to the next small thing. And the more you do this, the more easily you become the person you've been trying to force yourself to be. And when you become that person, you don't need to be more consistent because that's just who you are and that's just what you do.